Alright guys, this is episode 3 of turning a Crown Vic into a trophy truck. If you haven't seen episodes 1 or 2, check out the link in the descriptions, you'll see them there. Let's just jump right into it. Alright guys, I'm tired of looking at this ugly frame here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm not sure if it'll work. I'm not sure how good it'll look rather. I'm sure it'll work. But I'm gonna cut this down. Following this line on the bottom, I'm gonna cut it with the reciprocating saw, and then I'm going to grind it right here so we just have this little metal flap, and then I'm going to bend this sucker in, and then I'm going to weld it all the way around. And I bet you this thing will look clean like the factory did it when I'm done. Let's see. Alright, here's how it's looking now. Came out pretty nice. I'll finish welding the bottom when I throw this sucker up on the lift, but like the factory made that weld. Alright, here are the sidebars that I'm going to go ahead and install. Right here on each side. And then here's the fiberglass. I marked out, you can see a little bit of the Sharpie line, but I decided that I would like to have the sidebars actually stick out from the fiberglass on the outside to give me something that to protect the fiberglass in case I come down on some rocks. Because this truck isn't going to be super tall because it just doesn't have a ton of travel. And so I figure I'll cut the fiberglass here, have the bar stick out, and then go from there. Alright, I've got that fiberglass all cut out. This is where the tube ended up. I really like the way that it looks. It's going to be quite strong. Keep me from damaging that fiberglass if I accidentally get a little too close to the rocks. So now I get to do the main hoop across here. So that's going to be fun. So let's get started. Alright guys, as you can see, the main hoop and A-pillars are already installed here. What happened was I was trying out a new remote on my time-lapse camera and it kept turning it on and off, so that footage was worthless. But I'm dropping the vehicle down right now so that it'll sit on the bump stops. That way it's at full compression, and then I'm gonna put the fiberglass body on so that I can see exactly where it needs to be. And that's actually good because if you look at the A-pillar bars at the bottom, they were straight. And then here's the fiberglass. I actually had to move the fiberglass back like 3 or 4 inches. So I had to cut those A-pillar bars out. And then you'll see when I remove this door here, at the very bottom, what I did was I kicked the bar back out so that it would made up to those lower bars. And so I'm putting on the sidebars now, and they've got a pretty strong curve on the back, and that allows me to move the seat out a little farther, and then that curve fits right into the groove that's on the door. You know, it's got that pretty aggressive Lamborghini-like scoop on it, and so I figured I would put this bar directly above that, and it just gives me that little bit of extra room, mostly just for my arms. I think I'm gonna have to run window nets on this because the seats are so far to the outside, and when a vehicle rolls over, sometimes, especially off-road, it's a little natural to try to reach out, and that's like the worst thing you could do. So I figured I'd put the seats wide and just go with some window nets for protection. But so I take the seats out here. I'm just going to weld these sidebars up. They came out pretty good. The fiberglass was actually farther off from left to right than I thought it would be. The right side ended up being like 3/4 of an inch different from the driver's side, and so I ended up having to decide if I was going to make the roll cage perfectly straight and then mess with the fiberglass, or if I was going to just make the roll cage a little bit off from being symmetrical and just deal with it. And so that's what I ended up doing because it was a lot easier than having to redo large portions of the fiberglass. But I'm putting a bar on the bottom here, and this is the bar. If you remember when I did the transmission mount, I said I was going to add some support to it, and so that's what this bar is for. So I'm going to weld up some little brackets so that it helps hold the transmission up, and those brackets will have screw holes in them rather, so that everything can just unbolt and then drop out of the bottom. So I'm getting this sucker welded up, and then I was hoping that I'd be able to, when I installed the seats, mount them directly to that back bar, but that did not end up working. So it ended up taking a little bit more work, but I did this all kind of on the fly. Sometimes I'll, write out a lot more, and I'll draw up little diagrams of what I want it to look like and take all the measurements. But for this project, I decided it would be quicker to just kind of willy-nilly go with the flow. Because it's for me, so it didn't have to be perfect, and time is definitely of the essence here. It's got a tight budget for money, but it also has a tight budget for time. I only blocked out about 6 weeks to work on this project, and I'm actually spending a little bit more time than I thought I would on it because it's so much fun that I want it to turn out a little bit better. But yeah, it's coming along so good. The hardest bar that I have to do in the whole project is this crossbar that's basically where the front of the seat mounts. And so I wanted that bar to go all the way across and over the transmission tunnel, and the reason for that, oh, here it is, that giant bar. The reason for that bar specifically, instead of just doing like a 90-degree bend and mounting the seat to that, was that the transmission has 2 bolts that hold it in, and then the engine has 1 bolt on each side. So you have a total of 4 bolts that are holding in a 748-pound engine. So in the off chance that those bolts give away, or if this thing rolls multiple times, I wanted to make sure that if the engine and transmission break free, that they don't go anywhere, specifically crushing my beautiful face. So, so I thought that I would just do a really solid bar. So here I am pretending to drive and making sure that it doesn't interfere with my head on that sidebar. So it's close enough to where I'm probably going to, well, I'm definitely going to do like a foam padding around it. But right now I'm just welding up the back bar for the seat mounts. So these are some old beard seats that I had from a project. Gosh, it was the first truck that I ever really built. It was my first vehicle, actually. So I bought these in 2002, and I put them in my 1984 Ford Bronco that I thought was just the coolest thing in the whole world. And they've been in a few different vehicles since then. My first truck, that Bronco, ended up getting scrapped because I just beat it up too bad. But the seats lived, and so here they are in this. I think I'm going to get them reupholstered because as you'll see, the back seats that I install are nice and new, and these are pretty much the only thing on the vehicle that are still going to be ugly. But let's see, what am I doing here? Oh yeah, so because it is going to be a 5-seater, I decided to put a little hoop in the back, and so it's going to look a little interesting because it has a truck fiberglass body on it, but I think it'll be kind of cool. The people in the back will have good vision out of the side because it doesn't have as much fairings there, and I decided I'm going to do a full roof on it just because it gets to be 120 degrees out here, and so you do not want to hop into those seats when the sun's been blasting on them. So that bar that I'm installing in the back here, that was actually my first attempt at doing the hoop in the center, but it came out just a little bit wider than it would fit within the fiberglass. So I thought, hey, I'll just use it in the rear. So what I did was I rebent it at a little bit more aggressive angle so that it would fit back there. And you'll see I'm about to make a mistake, and I'm totally unaware. So the rear axle is tucked all the way up on the bump stops, right? And if you notice here, I'm double checking that I've got about 2 inches to spare on each side. And I'm thinking, okay, these tires come up all the way and they're not touching. Now I know that when it flexes at an angle that the tires will actually get kicked in, but I figured they wouldn't get kicked in that much. And as you'll see later, that was a giant mistake. So I should have raised this up a little bit or done a little bit more aggressive angle on that bar, but I didn't because I didn't know. So I'm trying to make sure that it's, as true as can be to the front, measuring everything a couple of times and trying to be professional on a quick build, but it wasn't the first mistake that I've made on this build, and it certainly will not be the last. So what I decided to do here is go ahead and weld up those 4-inch square plates to the frame, and then I weld the new rear loop to those plates, completely unaware that I'm taking away what ends up being about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch of travel, but it's not the end of the world. And well, I can tell you it's not even the last mistake I'm going to make on this clip here. So right after I finish welding that up, I decide that I'm going to chop the rear end of the frame off. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to keep the fuel tank in the factory location, which is directly behind the axle tucked in those frame rails. And so I thought, hey, I'll cut these off and then I'll do round tubing directly from it in the same location, and that will allow me to put the fuel tank there, and then on the outside, because the round tubing is smaller than the frame, it'll allow me to run the coilovers in the factory shock location, which is far on the outside. But as you'll see, that runs into a whole host of problems that I end up dealing with later. It's kind of fun to watch this in high speed, because I sure wish I was this fast, but I'm watching myself do things unnecessarily occasionally and making mistakes, and it's just kind of funny after the fact. But on a build this big, especially when I'm just pushing through it real quick, and it's such a low budget build that there's a lot of room for error, it's not a show vehicle or anything. Oh look, here's my little wheels turning, going, is there any way I can do this without having to pull these wheels off? And there's not, so I end up jacking it up so that I can get access to the outside of the frame with the angle grinder. But it's just kind of silly to watch you make little mistakes here and there, and grind away. This frame, an interesting thing about this frame is that it has to be high strength steel, because the grinder deals with it just fine, but you'll see I have to whip out the reciprocating saw in order to keep the cut straight on the bottom, and I use that same reciprocating saw at the beginning of this video on the front of the frame. And I tell you, I have never gone through bits, or blades rather, on that saw like I have when I'm cutting through this frame. It is so hard. It's the same saw blades that I use for everything else, but just a pain in the rear end. So I think it looks kind of cool here, starting to look like a nice little buggy. But yeah, well, that's it for the time lapse. I'll let myself take over from here. Alright, I'm trying to figure out the rear suspension now. If you notice, there's just not a ton of room here, and then as the axle gets wonky, I don't want the tire rubbing up against the coilover. So I'd like to use this mount, and that's part of the reason why I cut off the rest of the frame here. What I think I'm going to do is cut out a little triangle in the frame here, so I can take this piece on the edge, bend it in, and then I can do a flat plate here, and then I can do a tube to finish up the rear end. So that's the plan. That should give me enough room to squeeze that coilover in. So I'll do that now. All right, this is how it's looking right now. In the rear, I ended up welding up those plates. And my other camera is all out of space, so I'm not doing a time lapse on it right now. I haven't welded up this bar in the back or this crossbar yet, but I'm about to because I've got all the angles just right. And it's looking pretty good. So I'm thinking of doing an X in the back and then doing the spare tire right there. I think that'll be pretty cool. All right, here's how it's gonna look with the spare tire on the back. I'm gonna have to build a mount for it. So I think I'll just do some lug nuts. I'll do a plate, run some studs, do lug nuts, and then build a little bracket on the back side here. But what I'm gonna do right now is work on the rear suspension. So I've got the coilover in here, and you can see now I've got enough room to wiggle it around. And so it's gonna end up something like this. But it's at full compression right now, and so I need to jack it up, drop the rear end, and then see where it's going to sit, and then build the mounts. So let's get to it. All right, I got a good news, bad news situation brewing here. The flex looks good. I'm happy with that. That seems like an awful lot of flex for a Crown Vic. The issue that I'm having, as you can see, this tire is going to jam up into this. And it didn't do it at full compression, and I knew that it would get a little bit closer, but man, I had like 2 inches to spare. I just didn't realize the tire would flex in there that much. And it would have been nice to use a tire that had a little bit different offset, but it is what it is. The good news though is that with this amount of flex that it has, let me see if I can get this in here to show you. That's not the only thing that would be about to hit. So this bolt is about to hit, and even if that bolt doesn't hit, the bracket's about to hit the frame. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna swap out this bump stop for just a slightly larger one. And it's a bummer because it's gonna limit some of my flex, but it'll protect everything. So that's good. If you see, I welded up this bracket here, and I had the coilovers mounted, but this gap, the coilover was too far forward, and so I'm going to have to angle the coilover farther out, which is less than ideal, but that's the only way that it's not going to interfere with the tire under any circumstances. And I can't move the mounts inboard because I want to keep the factory fuel tank in here. All right, here's the new plan. I'm going to mount the coilovers on top of the old spring perches, and to do that, I'm going to grind off this top lip, and I'm going to weld on these round plates. And then on top of those plates, I'm going to weld on these tabs. That'll mount the coilovers there. Then they'll go through. And you can see on the one side, I have it fully extended to try to see how much room I've got. And then on the other side, it's compressed. You can see I'm running into a little bit. I'll have to clear away a little bit more, but overall, I think it's looking pretty good. And then I'll probably lower this bar just a hair, and then get it all mounted. And then once they're mounted, I'll make sure that I've got enough clearance, and then I'll cut anything else that has to be cut to make it fit. All right, here's how the rear suspension turned out. I'm quite happy with it. I'm going to do some reinforcements on this bar. I'm probably going to go from here down to this plate, and then probably above I'll probably do a couple extra bars. But yeah, I'm super happy with it. I used a couple of tabs on top of these spring perches, and then I think I'm going to do limiting straps probably from here down to here. But I will have to order those up. The ones I have are way too long. So let me show you what it looks like when it cycles. So here's the tire, how close it gets to the roll cage. And so I'm having to move around the bump stop here. And what I did was I built this little spacer to bolt in here. And you see how it's got a little lip to it? And that's to weld, because the one side's higher than the other. And then on the bottom, I tapped in a 3/16 thread so that I can just screw in this cool guy. And that'll be what I'll use right here as a little bump stop until I decide that I need to add a hydraulic bump stop right here. I'm sure I'll need that at some point if I get airborne enough. But I thought this bracket came out pretty cool, so I just wanted to show you. Alright, check it out. I finally got a back seat for it. It was only $80 and it was brand new. It was removed from the second row of a Tahoe that was going to get turned into a canine police vehicle. So it was pulled out before the vehicle went into service. So I've got it partially mounted up. I did a bar here with a couple of tabs, but I'm going to have to figure out how to mount it in the rear here. But man, I thought that was a good deal, and it turns it into a 5-seater. But check it out, it looks pretty awesome. Alright guys, let's talk about this budget. It's tight, it's very tight. I'm running out of money. So I posted a bunch of stuff on locally and then on eBay. I was able to get $35 for each of the front, the bigger catalytic converters, and $25 for each of the rear ones. So $120 for that. I don't know, let me know in the comments if that's a good rate for 4 catalytic converters. $85 I got for the 3 computers that I'm not using for the electrical system. I sold those on eBay. And then $20 for a passenger airbag to my buddy, who I think he's just gonna blow it up, but who knows. So $225 I was able to scrounge up from this thing, and I'm gonna apply that mostly towards paint. I'm gonna use a little bit nicer paint than I was originally planning because I'm really enjoying this build. I think that it's gonna be, it was gonna be nicer than I thought it was gonna be, and so I don't really wanna rattle can it, I wanna do it right. Alright guys, this is how it's looking right now. I have the coilovers fitted with just some PVC that I cut so that it would sit at its ride height. So this is how it's going to cruise around at. And it's got about 30% up travel, and then about 70% is going to be down travel. But I really like how the rear suspension turned out. I added a little support to it, but I need to add some more. But I figured this was a good stopping point because it's really starting to look close. So the next step is I'm going to put fiberglass back on it, figure out exactly where I need to cut it, and then remove the fiberglass, do the cutting and the reinforcements on the fiberglass. And then once the fiberglass is totally done, I'll put it back on the vehicle, and then I'll do all the fiberglass mounts. And then as soon as all the fiberglass mounts are done, I can remove the fiberglass, and then I can basically finish the buggy and finish the fiberglass on their own, and then put it all together. Then it'll be ready for testing. But here it is. Man, I think it's looking awesome. So we're about halfway done, getting there. Alright guys, thanks for making it this far. That's it for part 3. Part 4 will be out in 2 weeks, and I think it'll be pretty cool because I have to buy a bunch of parts for it, which is always fun. And then I'd like to have it running and driving under its own power, at least to move it around the yard, and that's also very fun. That's a good milestone on these builds. But next week I'm going to do a video that's a little bit different, but I think it's something that you guys will really enjoy, so stay tuned for that. And if you liked this, please spread the word. I still have a very small new channel, so getting the word out there really helps. And if you don't like it, then It'd be kind of strange for you to make it this far. This is a pretty long video. So if you don't like it, just go watch something else. There's like a billion videos out there on YouTube. Take care.